Creating a real app using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS involves several steps. Let's go through a simple project, a to-do list app. This app will allow users to add tasks, to mark tasks as complete, and also to delete tasks if they don't want it in the task list. So this is the basic HTML that we'll do. We'll cover HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in this particular application to get you up and running in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Hi, I'm Vivin Arana, and I'll be guiding you through this course. So let's go ahead and start with the project. I'm using Sublime Text, but you can use any editor that you want. Also, I've created a folder called as HTML projects on my desktop, which I'm going to open in Sublime Text. And inside this project, I'm going to add three files. First one is index.html, where I will be saving all the HTML code. Next, I'll create a styles.css, where I will be saving all the style sheets. And next is the JavaScript file. I'll call it javascript.js. So these are three files that I need. It's for HTML, styles, and JavaScript is in scripts.js file. So I'm going to start from index.html, and this is where we will create our to-do list app. So first, what we need is to understand the structure of HTML. So first thing that you start your HTML document is doc type HTML, which you type something like this, doc type HTML. What does this do? So all HTML documents which start with this declaration. This declaration is not an HTML tag, it is an information to the browser about what document type to expect. So next, after that, we'll start with the HTML tag, which represents the root of HTML document. So we start something like this, HTML. Now, sometimes I like to specify the language. So I'll say language equal to English. This is how you do it. And I'll close the HTML tag. Next, in HTML, one thing that you have to remember is always close your tags. It's always a good practice. Next tag that we're going to look over is head. The head, or HEAD, and I'm going to make sure I close it. The head element is a container for metadata, which is data about data, and is placed between the HTML tag and the body tag. Body tag is where all your actual HTML which you see in the browser goes. But in the head tag, the metadata which you place is data about the HTML document. It's not displayed anywhere, but it's there for Google, for Bing, for other search engines to look at, or for other people who are actually interested in data about your web page to know about it. Metadata typically defines the document's title, what character set you use, styles, where are the scripts, and other meta information. So let's go with the first one, where, as I mentioned, we save the character set. The character set is saved using meta character set equal to, I'm going to say UTF-8. That's one of the standards. So the character set attribute specifies the character encoding for the HTML document for this particular code. The HTML5 specification encourages web developers to use the UTF-8 character set, which covers almost all the characters and symbols in the world, which includes your numbers, your characters, your smileys, images, everything. So what are the next thing that I want? Next thing that I want to define is a viewport. So I say name equal to viewport, and a viewport is user's visible area of a web page. The viewport varies with the device and will be smaller on a mobile phone than on the computer screen. So this kind of helps you with having a page that can fit well on your mobile devices as well as your computer screens. The width parameter or content parameter, where we are going to specify width equal to device width, and I'll say initial scale equal to 1.0. So this width, the device width part, sets the width of the page to follow the screen width of the device, which will vary depending on which device you're using. The initial scale 1.0 part sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded by a browser, be it on a phone or on a computer. The next thing that I'm going to look at is title. Now this title shows up on the top of a browser. The title tag defines the pretty much the title of the document. The title must be text only, and it is shown in the browser's title bar on the top in the pages tab. So this one, I'll say whatever my app is, be more specific, to-do list app, and I'm going to close the title tag. Next, I want to specify the style sheets that I'm using here. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the link tag. Link relationship equal to, so the relationship between the current document and the link document is specified here, where I'm saying it's a style sheet. And where do I find it? href equal to, so href is used to specify the URL of location. So I'm going to say, since it's the same folder, I'm going to say style.css. So those are the things that I want to do in head. Next, let's go to the body. So body is where you will have all the data about your HTML file. What I try to do mostly is sometimes I put my script tags, JavaScript tags here, where I specify what type of script it is, and I give the source of the JavaScript, which is in this case script.js. Sometimes I do it here. You don't have to specify type, this is not required, but sometimes it's good to have that. Sometimes, depending on what I have in my script, I will also specify it before the closing of the body tag. So I want the entire page to load first before the JavaScript loads. That's a good practice sometimes, depending on what code you have. So in this particular case, I'm going to say load the web page first, then we can look at the JavaScript. Now inside this, I first would want to create a container for my code. So I'm going to use div as the container. Div is where you add all your, so it kind of creates a layer for your app, and inside that I'm going to give a header with h1 tag. So there's h1, h2, h3 until h6, which are header elements, and I'll say here to-do list. So this will show up as a header bolded element on top of the page. Next, I want to have a input field or a text field and a button. So the text field will have specify what I want to enter, but I want to create it as a form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a form. So there's something called as form tag. Always good to give a ID to your form. So I'm going to call it to do form, and of course close the form. And inside form, I will add an input, which is asking me what type of input you want. Do you want a text field? Do you want a radio button? Do you want something else? So I'm going to say it's a text input. I don't want to give a name, but I'll give an ID. ID are unique characters, so you should make sure that your IDs are not same in your web page. I'm going to say to do input, and I can also add a placeholder which will add a text inside this input field, which will tell user what to do. Add a new task, that's what I'll call it, and below it I'll create a button. I'll say button type equal to submit, and it will say add, close the button. So that's what will be displayed. Now we've done a bunch of things. Now how does it look like? So I can right click on this and open in a browser, or another thing that I can do is I can go to my folder, take that HTML, and then just drop it on a browser, and you will see that the web page is rendered, where we have the h1 tag and we have the input box, and it says add a new task, and it has the add button. So this is your basic HTML page. Now I want to make sure that when user adds task, it shows up in a particular location below it. So right below, let's say after form, I'm going to create an unordered list. I'll name it to do list, and this is where all the items that I'm adding will appear. I'm not going to do anything else here. I'm going to keep it this way, save it and run it, and I have this. Now if I do something here, add, nothing is happening, so I need to go to JavaScript and add the code to make sure that I can add stuff. So what in JavaScript, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something called as document.add event listener. You have to make sure that you don't misspell this, because if you misspell, you'll probably have errors. So what I'm saying, add event listener when the document object model content is loaded, which means when the web page is loaded, what do I want to do? I want to run this function, anonymous function, and inside this, it's always better to close your statements with semicolon. Inside this, I am gonna get first the form. So I'll say constant to do form equal to document. For in that HTML document, I'm going to say get element by ID, and that ID is ID is to do form. If you remember, we gave this name to our HTML form here, to do form. We have to do input also and to do list also. So I got that to do form. I'm going to copy it twice. Next, I'm going to get that input where user will enter the particular task they want to do. I'm going to say get document get element by ID to do input, and the final one is the list. We created a list which is empty right now, and this is the reference to that list where I will add all the elements. Now next thing that I'm going to do is in the to do form, there is something called as a submit button. If you remember, we created a submit button. So when the button is clicked, what I want to do is I want to add an event listener, and this event listener is submit. If this form, what it means is if this form is submitted, I want to run this function with the event, which is the submit event. And what do I want to do? So usually what happens is, if you see here, this is a submit button, and when I click on it, you see it's refreshed. You see that thing kind of. So what is happening is it's submitting this form. So what you can do is you can take that event that was passed, which is submitting event, and say prevent default, which is don't submit the form. Do not submit the form. Do this instead. What do I want it to do? I'll say add to do. I'll say I will create a function called as add to do, which is to do input dot, and pass this value, to do input dot value. So every time user presses the add button, I will call this function called as add to do, which I'll write in future, and to this I'll pass whatever input, the text that user entered in this particular field. I'll take the value of that and pass it to that, and then I will make sure that this to do input dot value is empty. If I run this right now, it will not work because I still need this function. So right below here, I'm going to just quickly create to do, and I'll pass the task, which is whatever was passed over there, and I'll not do anything in here just so that it doesn't give me an error. I created this function. Let's refresh this. Now if I add something, you see it emptied the field because I asked it to do this. And if you see, it doesn't refresh the page, which means it's not submitting anything. If I remove this, refresh, run it, you see it's doing something, so which means it's submitting the form. And refreshing the page. So now with this, what it will do is it will submit this to this particular function. Now what do I need to do once this function is clicked? What I'm going to do is I'll say if task dot trim. So sometimes you tend to add like spaces in front and back. So I'm going to say trim. After trimming, if it's still empty, that means the user didn't enter anything in there. I am going to say return. So in this case, what happens is if I do not enter anything and press add, it will not do anything. It will just ignore, because you don't want to enter an empty task. You can also add like some error cases where if the user enters something, you can give an alert saying, hey, enter something inside the text field here. Next, let's create an li item, which is a list item. Document dot create. You remember we have this UL here, unordered list. So inside this I want to add list items. So for that, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a element li, and then I am saying li dot text content. So I am saying the text content for this list item is the task that was passed to us. So whatever user enters, I'm passing to the function, and I am setting it in this list. And once I have that item, what I'm going to do is I am going to take that item and go to the to-do list that I've created, and I'm going to say append child li. So if I say yes, you see how it can, and there you go, your basic to-do list is almost ready. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that there is a way for me to say that a particular task is complete, so it just marks it off, or delete a particular task. So I'm going to add two more buttons in here. So I'm going to create a constant, let's say complete button equal to, let's say, document dot create element. In this case it's a button, and to this complete button, what I'm going to do next is add a text to it, and that text will be complete. And to the complete button, I am going to add an event listener. So every time user clicks on that uh, complete button, what I want to do is I want to add an event listener which is click. So user clicked on that button. What do I want to do? I want to run a function, and inside this function I am going to say a list item dot class. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this button is marked off, so I'll have to assign it a particular class to it so it looks different. So let's do that a little later, but for now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say just make sure that the class of this particular li, I am toggling it to a particular class called as complete, which I'm going to write it later. So for now you'll not see much difference because that class doesn't exist. Next, I'm going to create a delete button, and I'm going to do the same thing as this, most of it. So I'm going to call it a button. I'll make sure that's called delete, make sure this is delete button, and when the click happens, in this case I want to remove that item from to do list dot remove child, and the child is this particular li item. And next I want to do is li dot append child, the complete button, and similarly delete button. So it will add those buttons to that li. Let's look at it how it looks like. So I have this. See, when I press complete, nothing happens, but when I press delete, it's deleted because we have not yet created a class for it. Can keep on adding, I can delete stuff, and it works. So now this kind of completes our JavaScript, but how do we check this? So let's go ahead and create some styles for our classes. So first thing that I wanted to do is add that completed class. So li dot completed, if I am not wrong, that's what I've named it. Let's see. Oh, complete. I called it complete and I called it completed on the other side. Let's make sure I am consistent. Completed. Okay, that's perfect. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say text decoration is line through, and I'll give a color of a slight lighter color. So let's look at it, how it looks like. Add, and if I say complete, I don't see it yet. Li, complete text decoration, line through, and color is right, and I have given the, so make sure thing is right. Let's inspect. So one way to figure out always is inspect a particular character. If you see here, and when I say complete, it's adding if you see, it's removing and adding. So it is working, but it's not showing up properly right now. Let's go ahead and add the rest of the styles. Let's see if there was any errors. You can always look at your console. Failed to load resource style.css. So it's failed to load that styles, or because I called it styles here, and here I said style. That's why it makes sense. Run it again, and there you go, it worked. So naming is very important. You have to make sure that you name your files properly. Now let's go ahead and make this page a little bit more stylish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the body. So when there are HTML elements, you can directly use the body, li, something like that, to specify what the style is. I'm going to start with font family. That's my family of what font you want. That's my favorite one, where you mention what style you want. So this is what I want. You can look at the different fonts that you have, but these are mostly defined by your designer, or you can look them up online. I want to use background color, and background color I want F4, F4, F4. If I save this, run it, you see it has a slight grayish color in the background, and if you see to-do list kind of change, the font change, it looks a little more nicer, more professional. I'm going to say display for my body is flex, and I will say justify the content, the entire content, to center. I will also say align the items in the page to center. I will also say the height of the page should be 100 VH. Now sometimes you give 100%, 100 pixels. So what is this VH? VH stands for viewport height. This unit is based on the height of the viewport. A value of 1 VH is equal to 1% of the viewport height. Now a value of 100 VH is equal to 100% of the viewport height. So what I'm saying indirectly is use the height of the entire page depending on which device it is. Use 100% of it. For width, you use VW, just FYI. And then I'm going to give a margin of 0, so there's no spacing and it looks pretty clean. So I'll save this, I'll run it, and if you see, it came to the center of the page. It's actually in the center of the page. This is the center line, if you see, and below it, it started everything. You can give a padding and stuff, and then if you want to make it more on the top, it's up to you, however you want to assign it. You can also create, for example, in my div, I can call this, I can directly give div and give styles, but you can also give classes like this and use that class instead of giving. So classes you use by dot. I could have just said div, it would mean the same, but just to show you a different style, I am using a class container. So here I'm going to say background is white. So background color will be white for this particular div. Padding, because it's on gray, white will look nicer. That's why I'm using that. Padding, I'm going to give it 20 pixel. I'll say border radius. So it looks a little bit nicer on the edges. I'm going to give a border radius of 5 pixels. And I'll also give a box shadow to it. So box shadow will have an effect of a nice shadow. Versus 0, 0 and 10 pixels, so it has like a shadow effect on the right side. I'll show you how it looks like. I can also give a RGB color to it with the alpha parameter, where I'm going to say it should be completely R is 0, G, RGB, red, green and blue are 0, and a transparency of 0.1. So when I do this, check this out. So if you see that slight shadow around, That's what I've specified. And this is our to-do list box. This is the container. Next, I can give some style to h1. I can, so as I mentioned earlier, you can directly use the tag and say that margin that I want to use is say 0, 0, 20 pixel. So if you see, it reduced the white space on the top, and I'm gonna text align that to the center. Okay, next let's look at it. Okay, so it's in the center. Now for the form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the form display, I want it to be flexible, so I will say flex and justify the content in there to the center of this. So if you see, it's nicer and much but I want to change this input. It doesn't look as good. Let's make it more professional. Don't not use the default one. For input, where I have type equal to text, so I don't specify, I don't touch any other inputs in future if I add some other type of inputs. Padding, I'll give 10 pixel. I'll give a border of so it has a nicer border with a solid border of color gray CCC, and I'll also give a border radius to it, or else it will look more like this. So I'm going to say border radius of, let's say, 3 pixel, and I'll say flex is 1. So when I do this, you check this, it's become a little bit bigger with the padding, with the border radius. You can increase if you want to. This is the 5 pixel, where this is the 3 pixel. So up to you, however you want it. Now the button is too close to this. Let's move this button separate. So I'm going to say button padding. I'll give padding of 10 pixel again. I'll give border of none. I don't want a border because I want to give a background color to this, which is a particular greenish color. I'll say 28A745, which looks something like this greenish color. Now the color of the text doesn't look good on that, so I'm going to give a color of white, and that looks better. Now when I move my pointer on top, I want to see a cursor, so I'm going to say cursor is pointer. That's what I want to see. What this does is, if you see, now it became a finger. That's what I want. I want to give a border radius of same as the text field, and margin left of 10 pixel. So the reason I gave margin text is there's like some spacing between this. Before it was too tight, so that's what I did. Now when I moved my mouse on top of this button, nothing happens. So I want to create that hover effect. So I'm going to say button hover. This is how you create hover effect. I want to change the background color to a different color. I have a specific color in mind, 218838. So now when I move on top, you see a little bit darker, so I know that it looks like a button. Next, when I add stuff, like if you look at this, all the buttons are now same color, but this doesn't look as good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some styles to this UL and LIs. So UL, I'll say list style equal to none, so it doesn't show that bullet point, and I'm going to give a padding of 0, so it will look something like this, no styles. And with LI, let's, now everything else, the text is inside the LI, so let's give some background color of, let's say I can give F9, 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 one of my favorite colors. I'll give a padding of 10 pixel, and I will give a margin of 10 pixel 0. Let's see how does it look like. Okay, it looks better. You see some background there, so it's slight color change, so it kind of makes it stand out. I'll give a border to it, border of 1 pixel, so it stands out a little bit more solid, and I'll use a little bit lighter gray color. Perfect. And now if I keep on adding, it keeps on adding below it, it looks nicer. What else do I need to do? Let's also give it a display of flex. It's flexible. I will also say justify content to, let's get a space between, so make sure that well spaced. Align the items to the center, because everything is center aligned in this particular page. And then let's give a border radius of 3 pixel and see how it looks like. Okay, let's give 1, 2, much nicer. This looks much better. Now the buttons inside these, I want to give some let's remove the background and stuff. So I'm gonna just move everything up so you can see it clearly. I have the button I have completed. I can say if there is a tag li and inside there is a button, then this is what you do with those buttons. I'm going to say background none. I'll say border none. I don't want it have any border. Cursor I want to have pointer, and color I want DC 3545. So now when I add task, you see it looks a little different. Even though the hover is still there, I want to make sure the hover is a little bit different. So I can say li button, so probably you know by now, hover. And for this, I'm going to say color of C82333. Let's see how it looks like. 1, 2, and if you see hover on top of this, it has, okay, what happened? Li button hover, oh, color of the text needs to be changed. Li button hover. Why did not you not change? Let's add. It looks same as what we had before. Did I give the same color? Let's right click, inspect, and let's look at the button, li button. Okay, let's go ahead and make Mushu complete. Add one more task, delete, delete, and it works. So this is a basic example of your application. It works fine. This is pretty simple code, basic code. We're going to do more in the future, but I hope this helps to get you started on building your basic HTML to-do list.